She was sold like property by her stepmom. What happened next will shock you. The summer sun beat down on the Baytown harbor, hot and relentless, turning the scent of salt and fish into something almost sharp. Voices rang out in the narrow market lanes, sellers calling prices, gulls shrieking overhead, nets flapping in the wind. And in the middle of it all, a girl stood like driftwood washed ashore. Clara, 18, barefoot and too thin, wore a faded green dress clinging to her damp skin. Her brown hair was tangled and stuck to her cheeks, her eyes fixed on the wooden planks beneath her feet. Her aunt stood beside her, loud and red-faced, waving at fishermen and dockhands alike. "She's strong for her size," the aunt barked. "Knows how to clean fish, sew nets, keep her mouth shut. Could be useful on a boat or in a kitchen." No one stopped. A few glanced over. One man laughed. "She looks more ghost than girl." "She ain't sick," the aunt snapped. "Just quiet. Too proud for her own good." Someone muttered, "Probably trouble." The aunt grabbed Clara's wrist hard enough to turn her skin white. "You stand up straight when I'm selling you." Clara didn't flinch when the woman's hand struck her shoulder. She stumbled, caught herself, then stood still again. She didn't cry. She hadn't for weeks. Then boots clicked against the dock. Slow, steady. A tall man in a weathered coat, salt crusting the sleeves, approached. His beard was gray, his eyes the color of fog. He smelled like sea and silence. "How much?" he asked. "Slow." The aunt blinked, startled. $2. You can take her. No refunds." The man looked at Clara. She still wouldn't raise her eyes. He pulled coins from his coat, dropped them in the woman's palm. "Then she's mine now," he said. And without another word, Elias Thorne, keeper of the Baytown lighthouse, turned and walked away. Clara followed. Not because he said to, but because no one else ever had. The lighthouse stood on the farthest edge of the bay, perched atop a cliff where the waves crashed hard enough to shake the earth beneath. The house beside it was small, whitewashed, and worn by years of storms. Gulls circled above. Wind whipped through the grass. There were no neighbors, no voices, just the sound of the sea. Clara stood at the gate, the hem of her dress fluttering like torn sails. Elias didn't speak as he unlatched it and led her toward the house. He walked like a man used to being alone. She followed him into a kitchen that smelled faintly of brine and burnt coffee. A kettle hissed on the stove. "You'll sleep in the room off the stairs," he said. "There's a cot. It's clean." She nodded. "You'll sweep the floors, scrub the pans, patch the curtains if you know how." Another nod. "I didn't bring you here out of charity. I need help. That's all." Still, she said nothing. He looked at her, finally, really looked. Her arms were scraped, her lip slightly split. But she didn't flinch beneath his gaze. "You get a roof and meals. Nothing more's promised." "I understand," Clara said softly, voice hoarse from disuse. Elias turned away, pulled a chair out from the table, and sat, reaching for a ledger. The waves crashed in the distance. He didn't tell her to sit, didn't offer comfort, just pointed to the broom by the door. "Lion or tuitaturus," Clara moved to it without a word. Lion. And as she swept dust into neat piles on the floor of her new salt-stung world, she didn't know what tomorrow would bring. But it was the first day in a long time where she wasn't being sold. It was enough. The next morning, Clara woke to the sound of gulls and the groan of old wood shifting in the breeze. The cot was stiff, the blanket thin, but she had slept, really slept, for the first time in weeks. She moved quickly, quietly, washed her face with cold water from the basin, brushed her hair with her fingers. The silence of the lighthouse wrapped around her like sea fog, heavy but not cruel. By the time Elias came in from checking the lantern room, she had boiled water and laid out a tin of dry biscuits and the last of a jar of jam. He grunted in vague approval, sat without comment. Later, she tried to carry a heavy bucket of seawater for mopping. Her grip slipped. The bucket clanged against the floor, water spilling across the planks like a tide. "Careful," Elias snapped, not turning from the oil lamp he was repairing. "Don't make work where there wasn't any." Clara knelt to clean up, her face flushing with shame. "Sorry," she murmured. He didn't respond. At midday, she overcooked the eggs. The yolks turned chalky. Elias pushed the plate away. "If you're going to cook, do it right." "I'll do better," she whispered. "That's not the same as doing it." The words cut, sharp and cold. Clara kept her head down. That evening, as she stood on the back porch, scrubbing sand from her shoes, the wind caught her dress and tossed her hair into her eyes. She didn't cry. Not when she burned her hand on the kettle. Not when Elias ignored her for hours. Not even when the silence in the house stretched so long it made her feel like a ghost. She didn't cry, because there was no one to hear it. But she did hum. Just a low, steady tune from her childhood by the marshes. A song her mother used to sing while shelling peas. The wind didn't answer. But in the window above, a small face peeked out, just watching. Jonah, Elias's boy. She met his eyes for a second. Then he disappeared, and something in Clara's chest stirred, for the first time since she arrived. Clara didn't see Jonah again for 2 days. Only felt him, little scuffs on the staircase behind her, a creak on the floorboards when she turned her back in the kitchen, a faint rustle outside the washroom door as she hummed softly to herself. She never tried to catch him, never called out. She simply let him watch. She knew what it was to hide behind silence. On the third evening, she was peeling potatoes at the side porch, soft sea air drifting in with the scent of wild thyme. The setting sun made the waves glow gold. She began humming again, barely above a whisper, just enough to keep her hands steady. That's when she noticed the boy. Jonah was sitting at the edge of the porch, knees pulled to his chest, arms wrapped tightly around them, his chin resting on the fabric of his sleeves. He didn't move, didn't blink. Clara's voice faltered for a beat, then picked up again, gentler this time. She kept her eyes down, gave him space, like a bird you don't want to spook. When she finished the song, she pulled a small biscuit from her apron pocket, one she'd saved from supper. She placed it on the step beside her and slowly slid it toward him. Jonah didn't move for a long while. Then, quiet as the dusk settling in, he inched forward, picked up the biscuit, and returned to his corner. Me. He didn't eat it right away, just held it in his hand like it was something rare, something safe. Clara let the silence hold, sway. From across the yard, Elias leaned against the tool shed, arms folded, watching the porch. He hadn't meant to eavesdrop. He'd come looking for a spare lantern wick. But he stayed. He watched the girl his son had finally chosen not to run from, Yasakra, and though he didn't say a word, he didn't walk away either. The morning was gray and damp. Fog clung low across the cliffs, wrapping the lighthouse in a hush. Clara moved quietly, washing dishes and sweeping sand tracked in from the back door. Elias had gone to the top of the tower to clean the lens. Jonah was, as always, somewhere unseen until she found the paper. It was on the kitchen table, creased, smudged with fingerprints and charcoal, but carefully placed. A drawing. 3 stick figures. One tall with a wide-brimmed hat, one small with spiky hair, and one with long waves of dark scribbled lines meant to be hair. A dress drawn with extra detail. The trio stood in front of a crooked little building that could only be the lighthouse. Underneath, in jagged block letters, D.A.D., Jonah, Clara. Her breath caught. She ran her fingers lightly over the paper, as if it might disappear. Footsteps sounded behind her. She turned. Elias stood in the doorway, coat dusted with salt, a coil of rope slung over one shoulder. He looked at the drawing, then at her, expression unreadable. "He left that for you," Elias said. Clara swallowed. "I remember my name," she said, trying to smile. Elias didn't smile back. Not exactly. But his voice softened. He sees more than he says. Always has. He crossed the room and reached for a mug on the shelf. For a moment, his hand paused beside the drawing, not touching it, just noticing. Then he turned and stepped out to the porch without another word. Clara tucked the picture into her apron pocket, heart thudding. People. It wasn't a declaration. It wasn't a promise. People. But it was something. People. Something like belonging. The fish market in Baytown bustled louder than the sea that morning. Boats docking, crates slamming, vendors shouting over one another. The air reeked of salt and brine, but Clara didn't mind. Elias had handed her a torn list and sent her alone for the first time. "Flour, onions, salt," he'd said, then added, "Don't dawdle." She didn't. She moved from stall to stall, the list clenched in one hand, Jonah's old woven basket in the other. Her hair was tied back, her sleeves rolled. People stared, some curious, some indifferent. She had grown used to it, until a hand brushed her elbow. She turned. A man with a stained hat and breath that reeked of ale was leering at her, his teeth crooked, eyes smug. "Well, well, you're the lighthouse girl, ain't you?" he drawled. "Heard old Elias took in a pretty one this time." Clara stepped back, throat tightening. "Excuse me." "Oh, don't get shy now," he grinned. "He got you keeping house or keeping him warm?" A thud cracked through the noise. The man hit the fishmonger's stall hard, pinned by Elias's forearm across his chest. The entire row fell silent. "She works under my roof," Elias said, voice low and hard. "You got filth in your mouth. Keep it away from her. Next time you won't be standing." I was just joking," the man stammered. Elias dropped him. "Then learn better jokes." He turned to Clara, who stood frozen by a barrel of oysters, basket shaking in her hands. "You all right?" She nodded, too quickly. "Yes." But her cheeks were burning, not from shame, but from something unfamiliar. Someone had drawn a line around her. Someone had stood between her and the world. The walk back was quiet. Elias rode beside the cart. He didn't speak, Twanoi. He didn't need to, Twanoi. That night, Clara brushed her hair with slow strokes and thought about the way he had looked at the man, like protecting her wasn't a choice, but a certainty. She went to bed not smiling, but steady. The night air smelled of salt and distant rain. The lighthouse hummed with quiet, its steady beam slicing the dark sky in slow, patient turns. Clara had just finished drying the last dish when she stepped out onto the porch. Elias was there, sitting on the worn bench, eyes fixed on the horizon. She hesitated, then joined him, folding a cloth napkin in her hands just to have something to do. For a long while, they said nothing. Then, without looking at her, Elias spoke. "You shouldn't worry about what folks say." Clara blinked, unsure if he meant the man at the market or something deeper. "I try not to," she replied softly. "They talk. Always will. But you keep your hands clean. You stay straight. That's all that matters." She nodded. The wind tugged gently at her braid. Then, after a pause that stretched like tide between heartbeats, he said it. "Clara." Her name, not shouted across a room, not barked with orders. Just spoken like it meant something, like she meant something. "Ella, Ella." She turned to him. "Vela." "Yes?" "That chicken stew you made yesterday," he said, voice quieter now. "Do it again tomorrow. Had flavor." Clara couldn't help it. Her lips curled slightly. "I will." He didn't smile, but his eyes lingered on her just a second longer than usual before he stood, tipped his hat back, and stepped inside. She remained, sitting beneath a sky full of stars, heart unexpectedly light. It wasn't flowers. It wasn't poetry. But it was the first time someone had said her name like it belonged in the world. And for Clara, that was more than enough. How are you feeling about the story so far? I'd really love to know what you think. Did it touch your heart or maybe remind you of something from your own life? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. And while you're at it, tell me, where in the world are you listening from? I'd love to see how far this story travels. The barn was quiet that night, lit only by the soft golden glow of a lantern swinging gently from a nail. The horses stirred in their stalls, the rustle of straw and the rhythmic creak of beams the only sounds in the hush. Clara had stayed late brushing down Bramble, the chestnut mare with the nicked ear. The work soothed her. It gave her something to hold when the world felt like mist slipping through her hands. She was about to leave when she heard it, Elias's voice. Not loud, not stern, just quiet, like a prayer not meant for anyone else. She was too soft for this place, he murmured, standing in the last stall with Midnight, his old black gelding. He brushed in long, even strokes, his hand moving slower than usual. Said something felt wrong. I told her she was just tired. He paused. Thought I knew better. Thought I was strong enough to fix everything. Another pause. The horse huffed gently. She died an hour after the boy was born. I buried her by the cliffs, under the cedar tree she liked. Clara stood still in the shadows. She didn't dare move. She didn't breathe too loud. She was the one who sang. Jonah remembers. That's why he won't speak. Not to me. Not yet. The lantern's light flickered. Then Elias turned. He didn't startle when he saw Clara standing at the barn's edge, hands clasped in front of her. "You came for the brushes?" he asked, his voice steady again. She nodded. "Yes." He gave a small grunt and turned back to Midnight. Clara stepped backward into the dark, heart heavy and aching, not because of what he'd lost, but because he had shared it. And somehow, that was a gift too. The morning after Elias's confession in the barn, Clara rose early, as always. She gathered water from the pump, set bread to rise, and swept the back steps before the gulls had even begun their chorus. When she passed the porch on her way to feed the chickens, she paused. Jonah sat there. Small, barefoot, knees hugged to his chest, in his lap a wooden box. Clara approached slowly, careful not to startle him. She didn't speak, just lowered herself beside him on the step. Dishes. For a moment he didn't move. Then, wordlessly, he opened the lid. Inside lay a simple hairbrush, old, wooden, the bristles worn smooth. The grain was dark with age, polished by time and memory. He held it out to her, both hands cupping it like something sacred. "Mama's," Jonah whispered. His voice was thin, scratchy, like it hadn't been used in years. Clara's breath caught. She took the brush gently, reverently. "Thank you," she said, her voice barely more than air. He didn't smile, but he didn't look away. That evening, by lantern light, Clara sat at the edge of her small cot and brushed her hair slowly, carefully. The bristles pulled through her curls like waves through seagrass, and she closed her eyes. The brush wasn't just wood and bristle, it was trust, a bridge between griefs. Later, Elias came in to pour a late cup of coffee. He paused when he saw the brush lying beside her on the table. "He gave you that?" Clara nodded. "Said it was his mother's." Elias didn't speak for a while. "She used to hum while she brushed it," he said quietly. "That boy remembers everything." Clara placed the brush back into the box like it was something sacred. "I'll keep it safe." Their eyes met across the lantern's glow. And for once, Elias didn't look away. "I don't think I've said this before," he murmured, "but I don't see you as lost anymore." Clara blinked. "You belong here," he added. "I see it in the way Jonah watches you, and how this place feels less empty when you're in it." He took a sip of coffee, turned toward the door, and just before stepping out into the night, he said, "I didn't think I was ready for anyone new, but now I don't think I'd like it here without you." The door clicked softly behind him. Clara sat still, the brush beside her, her hands trembling not with fear, but with something new, hope. The sky was clean and bright the morning Elias left. He was headed inland to deliver oil to the next lighthouse up the coast. 3 days gone, maybe 4, depending on the tide. Before climbing into the cart, he turned to Clara on the porch. "Jonah's been running warm," he said. "Keep an eye on him. Don't let him overdo it." Clara nodded. "I'll watch him close." He gave her a long look, one that lingered more than it used to. Then he tipped his hat and rode down the hill, cartwheels groaning against the gravel road. By midday, Jonah was flushed and quiet. Clara sat him in the rocker on the porch, with a cool cloth on his head and a biscuit in his hand. "I'm going to get more wood for the stove," she told him softly. "Stay here. Don't move." He nodded sleepily. She left for the shed. 5 minutes. No more. When she returned, the chair was overturned. Jonah lay on the floor inside, curled around his arm, whimpering. A chair was tipped beside him. A jar of honey lay shattered on the counter, sticky trails on the wood. "Jonah!" she cried, rushing to him. Blood trickled down his elbow from a gash. His face was pale, sweating. "You shouldn't have gotten up," she whispered, voice breaking. "You promised." He didn't answer, just winced. Clara wrapped the wound, cleaned it gently, soothed him until his breathing slowed. But guilt coiled in her chest like a rope pulled too tight. When Elias returned late the next day, dusty and sunbeaten, he stepped through the door and froze at the sight of Jonah on the couch, arm bandaged. "What happened?" His voice was already rising. Clara stood. "He had a fever. I left him on the porch for a moment. I was getting firewood. He tried to get something and fell." "You left him alone?" "I didn't think. He said he'd stay. He could have hit his head, broken his neck. I left him with you." "I'm sorry," Clara whispered. "I didn't mean for—" "I already lost someone," Elias snapped. His voice cracked open. "I will not lose my boy." Silence fell like thunder after lightning. His eyes were glassy, but his voice turned hard again. Cold. "Pack your things." Clara stared at him. "You'll leave in the morning." This time, there was nothing to say. No defense. Only heartbreak. Clara didn't sleep that night. She moved through the small house like a shadow, packing in silence, the same way she had arrived. 2 dresses, a cracked comb, and a bundle of thread. She folded them slowly, each crease a heartbeat, each motion weighed down by something more than sorrow. In Jonah's room, she paused. He was curled beneath the quilt, breathing slow, his small arm resting across the pillow. The bandage was still tight, his brow no longer fevered. She set the brush he had given her gently on his nightstand. Then, beside it, a plain white handkerchief, carefully hemmed, embroidered in tiny letters. "Jonah." She smoothed it with trembling fingers. Her throat ached, but she made no sound. If she looked at his face too long, she knew she wouldn't be able to leave. So she turned, slipped on her shawl, and stepped out the front door. The screen creaked, then shut with a soft thud. Outside, the sky was still dark, just a faint silver line over the sea. Fog clung to the rocks. The wind was gentle. The path was long. She didn't look back. Inside the house, everything felt heavier. Valabu. When Elias woke, the sun was barely touching the tops of the cliffs. He expected the scent of warm bread, the soft clatter of pans. Instead, there was only silence. "Bo!" He stepped into the kitchen. Her boots by the door were gone. "Bo! Bo! Pa!" Then he saw it. Clara! A single folded cloth on the hall table. He picked it up slowly. Ba! His son's name stared back at him in neat, careful stitches. Down the hall, Jonah sat on the floor in his room, arms around his knees, holding a crumpled piece of paper. Elias crouched beside him. "You saw her go?" Jonah said nothing. His lips were pressed together hard, eyes red but dry. Elias gently took the drawing from his hands. 3 figures, man, boy, girl, standing outside the lighthouse. Zalide. His jaw clenched. "I told her to go," he muttered. "Didn't think she actually would." Jonah didn't respond. Just held the empty space beside him like it mattered. That night, Elias didn't touch his supper. The stew sat cold on the table, untouched, steam long faded. The fire in the hearth crackled low, but the warmth didn't reach him. He sat in the rocking chair by the window, Jonah's drawing resting in his lap. The house, once filled with quiet movement, soft humming, the rhythm of broom strokes and the clink of dishes, felt hollow, not silent, just emptier. It wasn't just that Clara was gone, it was that she had taken something with her, something soft, something steady, something true, and he had pushed it away. By morning, the fire was nothing but ash. Elias stood, shoulders tight, and folded the drawing with rough hands. He slipped it into the inside pocket of his coat like it was a map. A compass. Bung. Fru. He didn't eat. Didn't shave. Fru. He just saddled his horse with shaking hands and slung a small satchel over his shoulder. Bung! Jonah stood on the porch in his socks, the wind ruffling his hair. His eyes watched every move, silent but expectant. Elias met his son's gaze, then tipped his hat low. "I'll find her." He didn't say where he'd look, he just rode. Not for trade, not for repair, but for her. The girl who had come with nothing, stayed with everything, and left a home full of unfinished sentences. The old chapel stood on the wind-swept cliffs, half swallowed by seagrass in memory. Its windows were cracked, its door hanging on a crooked hinge. Ivy crawled up the stone like time itself had tried to bury it. Elias dismounted quietly, tying the reins to a leaning fence post. His boots crunched over gravel and broken seashells as he stepped through the gate. He didn't knock. Inside, dust floated in sunbeams cutting through fractured glass. The pews were gray with age, the altar long abandoned. But she was there. Clara. Sitting in the front row, her back straight, hands clasped in her lap. Still as a tide before a storm. She didn't turn when he entered. "I thought you might come here," Elias said softly. She nodded, her voice quiet. "I didn't know where else to go." He moved slowly, boots echoing on the wooden floor. "What happened with Jonah?" He paused. "It wasn't your fault." She turned then, finally, eyes rimmed red but dry. "You told me to leave." "I did," he admitted, "because I was scared." He stood before her now, weathered hands open at his sides. "I already lost one person I couldn't save. I thought if I let myself care again, if I let myself need anyone, I'd lose them too." Clara didn't speak. "I didn't trust myself," he said. "But worse, I didn't trust you. And I should have." He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small silver ring, old and simple, worn smooth by time. "My mother's," he murmured. "She wore it until the day she died. I kept it, thinking I'd never give it to anyone." He looked at Clara. "I bought you once, and I'll carry the shame of that. But I'm not here to claim you." He dropped to one knee. "I'm here to ask. Stay, not as help, not as a burden. Stay because you belong. Because Jonah loves you. And because I think I do too." Clara stared at him, breath caught in her chest. Then, quietly, she reached out and placed her hand in his. Outside, the sea wind shifted, and the old chapel bell, cracked and rusted, gave one soft, imperfect chime, and Clara whispered, "Yes." They stepped out of the chapel hand in hand into a morning bright with salt and wind. The clouds had parted above the cliffs, letting shafts of light spill over the water. Behind them, the chapel stood quiet, its broken bell still swaying slightly, like it had exhaled the last secret it had been holding. Elias helped Clara into the saddle behind him. No words, just the quiet scrape of leather and the warm press of her hand on his shoulder. The ride home wasn't fast. It didn't need to be. Clara's head rested lightly against his back, and for the first time, he didn't ride with purpose. He rode with peace. At the lighthouse, Jonah waited. He stood on the porch steps, arms stiff at his sides, face unreadable. But the moment Clara dismounted, he ran forward, not quite a sprint, but enough to close the space with trembling urgency. He didn't speak. He just wrapped his arms around her waist and held on tight. Clara bent down, hugged him back, and whispered against his hair, "I missed you too." Elias stood back, watching. His throat worked once, twice, but no words came. Not yet. Later that evening, the three of them sat around the table. The stew was hot. The bread was fresh. The silence was different now. Full, not empty. Jonah passed the salt without being asked. Clara hummed while she poured tea. Elias watched them both with tired eyes and a loosened jaw, and for the first time since the lighthouse had gone quiet, it sounded like home again. There were no grand declarations, no fireworks, no promises written in the sky, just a girl who had once been sold, now seated at a table where her name was known, and a man who had once buried his heart, now watching it beat again, in every glance, every soft breath, every second chance. At night, the lighthouse beam swept slow and steady across the waves, just as it always had, warning ships, marking home. But now, something had changed inside its walls. Laughter echoed sometimes, soft and sudden, like wind catching sails. The kitchen smelled of stew, not silence. The floorboards creaked with life again, not loneliness. Jonah spoke more now. Not often. But when he did, it was to ask Clara about seabirds, or to hum along under his breath as she sang old mountain songs by the window. Clara wore her hair loose more often, brushed it with the same wooden brush each night, and sometimes Jonah would hand it to her without a word, like a ritual that belonged to them. And Elias? He didn't change all at once. But he no longer sat alone by the fire. He no longer walked past her without looking. He said her name often now, sometimes softly, sometimes with a smile that flickered behind his beard like sunlight on water. One morning he brought home a small tin box. Inside was a new needle set. Shiny, unused. "For your stitching," he muttered, placing it in Clara's hands. "You've earned something better." She didn't cry. She just held the box like it was gold. Fra. Outside, the sea rolled on. The wind came and went. Ships still passed, but the lighthouse keeper wasn't just watching the ocean anymore. Pra. He was watching his family. Growing, healing, beginning. Clara, once discarded like broken driftwood, had become the anchor. The song and the silence. The light behind the beam. And Elias, the man who had locked his heart with grief, had finally opened the door. Not to rescue her, but to let her rescue him. Love, they found, isn't loud, it's lasting. The goal, like light across the water. If this story moved you, reminded you that healing is real, or renewed your belief in second chances, we invite you to subscribe to Healing Stories. Here, we share real-life journeys of strength, love, and hope. Stories that speak straight to the soul. Thank you for being here. And always remember, no matter how far you fall, there's always a way back to the light. Where are you watching from? Drop a comment below and let us know.